Welcome to the Excellence at Work podcast, where we explore the strategies and best practices that drive business success. I'm Rachel Cooke, COO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of our podcast, along with members of our executive team. In each episode, we'll dive into the latest trends, insights, and real-world examples from some of the most exciting leaders from organizations worldwide. Be part of our journey and learn from the best as we discuss innovative approaches and cutting-edge technologies for talent management, learning and development, leadership, diversity and inclusion, and more. Hi, I'm Rachel Cooke, the COO of Brandon Hall Group, and with me today is Mark Atkinson, the founder and chief executive officer of Mursion. We are going to be talking about skills, the future of successful upskilling, and combining practice and immersive experiences. I'm looking forward to our discussion with Mark. He has a lot of experience in the industry, 20 plus years in education and corporate learning. And we've worked with Mursion over the years, so it's great to have you with us today, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
And it's great to be connected. You're in San Francisco. I'm here in South Florida, and we were just talking about the weather as we were kind of connecting here today. And with the ease of technology, we can be in two places, but almost feel as if we're kind of in the same room, right?
Yes, and all of our clients have to figure out a way to run their organizations with all those people the same way, actually. It's both an opportunity and a challenge.
Yeah, it's interesting because as we kind of shift from in-office to remote and now to a blended, and there's mixed emotions depending on organizations and especially large global organizations as they shift more going back into the office. However, with how dispersed workforces are and different functions, even going back into the office, we still have to operate in somewhat of a remote capacity where we're still connecting with different regions, different functions, product lines. The complexity is enormous, depending on how you look at it, right? When you say.
Yes, absolutely. In our case, we were pre-COVID all headquartered in a lovely office in San Francisco. And during COVID, as we grew, many sort of digital providers of upskilling did during that period of time as companies migrated their models almost overnight in the pursuit of talent, which I think is a harbinger of where we're going as a society and a world. We looked everywhere to find the best people, and the best people aren't always in your neighborhood. And once you've built that infrastructure and you find great people that you want to collaborate with, it's kind of incumbent upon you to find ways to collaborate with them. And it's very hard to say to those people that there's no longer a place for them simply because we can all go back to the office. And in our case, at least, and I think this is true in other parts of the world, once people realize the purpose of going into the office is to go into a conference room and get on Zoom with people that they need to get things done, the push to stay and do it virtually is that much greater. So yeah, it's a changing world for sure.
And you have a fascinating background, a Yale graduate, founder of Teach Forward, kind of bringing your education experience and producing experience. Can you share a little bit more about your background and how you ended up finding or how you ended up being the founder of Mursion?
Sure. I was a television journalist for many years. I worked for Peter Jennings at ABC News at a time when network television was doing large documentaries about international and social issues in the U.S. and abroad. And it was at a time, I'm really dating myself here, that the whole online learning was becoming a new thing. And one of the earliest online universities sought me out because if you go back that far pre-video on the internet, it was by and large scrolling text. And I was interested in this intellectually, and I was very interested in the notion that learning experiences can have narrative structures, just like documentary film has a narrative structure, because documentary film is educative, obviously. if you marry the kind of narrative structures of learning to the pedagogical structures of learning, you can, particularly as video became possible on the internet, that created some interesting creative applications. And I pioneered a company that built what was called a video case studies around great teaching, which ultimately became the stuff of online learning for teaching. And I'd say immersion is the evolution of what I learned through the kind of learning you can do through video. In video, whether it's in education or in leadership, if you can get good recordings of yourself being a leader or a teacher, easier for a teacher than for a leader these days, you have the opportunity to reflect on how you come across in certain settings, whether you're empathetic, whether you're understanding your tone of voice, whether you allow people to listen to you and take turns in conversation. All these skills in the classroom was very much about to what extent do individual students get an opportunity to learn, meaning does the teacher, in effect, through bias and just a lack of awareness, not pay attention to everyone. And so there's a lot to be learned through reflection. And then one of my investors showed me simulation technology. And I thought I had seen the automobile, having been in the horse and buggy business for a while, because simulation takes that to a whole new level. In simulation, you don't look in the rear view mirror, you look in the road ahead of you, because you are expected to do leadership or do teaching, or in Mursion's case, activities related to nursing or a doctor giving feedback to the patients of a family patient, the family of a patient, under stressful circumstances. And these are make it or break it kind of skills for both individuals and organizations. And while a video of me making mistakes is powerful, having to demonstrate the capability in the situation that I'll be expected to do it on the job tomorrow or an hour from now is perhaps the most powerful learning experience you can have, which is why in super high stakes careers, the notion of simulation is very mature, to wit, pilots, obviously. Like, we don't want somebody learning to pilot a plane for the first time with passengers. And we definitely don't want a doctor giving feedback to the family of somebody who has confronting a very difficult medical diagnosis. Like, we don't want them having that conversation for the first time in the hospital either. We want people to be able to really practice and perfect these skills before they're expected to deploy them on the job. And I'll say one last thing. I think these are the skills that the future is seeking in professionals. As we look at the way the world is changing, increasingly large Fortune 100, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 organizations are saying we need people that can navigate change, lead inclusively, manage under difficult circumstances, and bring both sort of analytical strengths and empathy to the way they work on the job.
How would you help leaders today that are kind of shifting from the old paradigm to this new or more inclusive, more adaptable, more more collaborative type of leader?
So I think the first thing one has to do is be sure that people are inspired to be that leader. And I think to some degree that starts with the highest leadership of the organization. I think one of the things that we hear a lot from our clients is they want org level behavior change. Sometimes it's simply to get closer to their customer, because as organizations ossify under sort of structures that don't have really good communication from top down, but more importantly from the bottom up, they lose touch with the people who use their products and services, and they lack the inability to innovate. And so the leadership will often say, we really need to change the culture so that we are a listening culture, an empathetic culture, a culture that cares about the feedback around the quality of the work we do for the people we serve in our business or the customers we serve in our business. And if you want that, you start at the top leadership. And so we will get leaders to actually model the behaviors that they want to see. And simulation is a great way to do that. If I need to lead a team that is being expected to change the way it develops products or markets its products or interacts with its customers, it's incumbent upon me to explain the rationale for that, hear out the concerns that my team has about changing that process, and then actually persuade through a combination of listening, judgment, strategic thinking, and empathy, my team to move in that direction. Leadership is not simply the authority to command people to march in a certain direction. If you actually want that change to stick and persist, it is about influence, and garnering influence doesn't just come with title. It comes with the ability to persuade, which involves the ability to connect with the individuals you are interacting with. And so we get the leaders to model those behaviors. We capture recordings of what those models look like. We then invite their teams to do the same thing. And then we put those teams through a kind of a virtual coaching experience where they see their vulnerabilities and mistakes because they make them through simulation, and they get really powerful data and feedback in order to improve the way they do that. And they're encouraged to practice more. And most importantly, if you go back into the sort of the earliest days of this kind of approach to performance management, it had this kind of Darwinian view. Well, we're going to get some feedback on everybody and we'll simply lop off the people that were the bottom 10%. And that kind of Darwinian punishment culture doesn't really get you very far. What does get you very far is creating a psychologically safe place for learners to experiment on these skills and to safely fail, because we all have limitations. We all have types of people that get under our skin. We all have situations that frustrate us. And when we get frustrated, we revert to our sort of natural selves. And sometimes our natural selves are to look out for oneself and not to look out for the team. And it takes practice and training to keep the interests of the group sort of at the top of mind. And we're all about repeat practice with good analysis and feedback. And when you do that and you implement it in a consistent way across the org, we've done several studies that show that behavior change is real and measurable and can be tied very closely to business outcomes, which is, I think, one of the reasons why we see customers staying the course around this new modality of learning, which is really what simulation is.
And our research is also showing how important it is for leaders to be able to self-actualize and self-assess. And simulations like this or immersive experiences allow leaders to do that in a safe environment and to kind of understand what their triggers are. And this does come with experience and practice, as you said. You know, how you showed up 10, 15, 20 years ago is probably quite different than how you are today. So it's kind of taking some of the old bias, also assessing the current environment and what is needed, you know, especially with kind of the evolving technology and how global the world is. I feel that leaders have to have a much greater appreciation of diversity, not just because it's a good thing, but just because you're dealing at such a scale of it's not even ethnicity or in that retrospect, but it's just kind of diversity of thought. You're dealing with multi-generations in the workplace. We had a fascinating session this past week from companies, that were, kind of sharing from PepsiCo and from, I believe, Bank of America and a few others that were just kind of sharing, different industries, but different ways that they have to hire, manage, develop, and how important that technology is to help escalate and to help enable, but also, really kind of driving that from the culture. You can have great technology, but then how do you use it to help, from the leaders and then cascade that across the organization and drive that culture? What are some of the examples that you see or transformations that you've have seen with, these types of immersive experiences or simulations that are helping change the culture?
I think they'd be proud to hear me brag about them on this call. But I'll give two examples that we're part of that I think we're really proud to be associated with. Actually, I'll give you three. I I've been very impressed with the team at Liberty Mutual, a global insurance enterprise that is growing by leaps and bounds and is very singularly focused on the leadership skills that you were describing, and has built an integrated curriculum of learning resources around what are the changes that are happening in the workplace, how does it impact performance, how does it impact retention and the ability to recruit young talent, and the need for leaders to show up with the sorts of behaviors you just characterized, both a combination of strategic and analytical thinking coupled with a deep empathy for getting cross-functional teams to collaborate and problem solve in an inclusive way. And inclusive, certainly in today's political environment, gets spun in a really bizarre way. The way I like to think about it, I've always believed that in any given meeting, you want as a leader for the best idea to get heard and ultimately to carry the day. You don't want to make the wrong decision. And if you don't develop the skills at drawing out the individuals that have the best idea, to feel safe to present it to colleagues that may or may not agree with them, the organization ends up making the wrong decision because the best idea never got aired. And that kind of thing is happening a million times a day across big organizations. And it's critically important that leaders show up in such a way capable of eliciting the best idea and acting on it. And I've watched the way in which Liberty Mutual rolls out a program like this, not just in North America, but globally, in a way that is unifying to the organization, empowering to the leaders, and quite exciting to the teams themselves. And they do that, they weave practice throughout key parts of the learner's journey so that they can take stock of their own progress and get data on how they're changing the way they show up in the kinds of conversations that they're having at work. I will say another very big brand that I could not be more proud of that is presently doing a lot of things that we're seeing in the news to change the way they interact with customers, and that is Starbucks. Starbucks has always believed in the power of the community that they create in the stores where they serve. And if you're sort of paying attention to what's happening in that enterprise right now, they are working really hard to reestablish deep roots into those communities and remind people that this is a place where the community feels at home and welcome. And in a country that is divided on so many issues, I mean, going back to whether we would wear a mask when we went into a private space or not, or, whether or not people who are on the fringes of the social safety net in our communities should be allowed into our establishments, into whose political views get to be shouted out while they're in line waiting for this, that, or the other service. Like, those kinds of things are challenges for people that are navigating customers every single day. And I've never seen an organization that approaches those kinds of problems with the intelligence and commitment that folks at Starbucks do. And I just have been super proud to see the quality of the work that their learning team does every day. Those are two examples that come to mind. I'll give one last one that I'm just super proud of. I have watched the folks at Salesforce navigate the change around performance management in all of their companies. And they have really wanted to build a culture where folks can get sort of really strong feedback and still recognize that they're respected and honored by their leadership teams. And it's true across tech in some ways, given the difficulty of recruiting talent. I'd say a lot of organizations have had a culture where people tread lightly on performance management because they're afraid of scaring away talent and they desperately need the best talent. I've watched how the human resource team and the learning teams at Salesforce have very cleverly sort of embedded warm-up practice routines into the performance management rollout in order to give people an opportunity to practice how am I going to give constructive feedback, where the story focuses as much on the opportunities for improvement as it does the things that you're exceptionally talented at, so that people have an equal opportunity for growth. And organizations that are going down that path are organizations that really care about their people. You're doing your folks a better service by showing them how they can grow. This is, by the way, particularly true for the newest workers and for people that have been shut out of the workforce in traditional roles because they didn't get the kind of mentoring and feedback that enabled them to show up with the right skills in the organization. So those are three examples of things that I've seen that really impress me.
I would agree. Those companies are spearheading some of these, approaches to kind of transform and to scale their organizations, but also to help them thrive in an environment that's very competitive, changing. I think that kind of aligns to drive resilience and to help teams to persevere and to manage through these turbulent times. Can you also, from your perspective, some other examples, or is there anything else that you can give advice on to organizations or leaders as they kind of continue to forge ahead here?
I think that there has been a post-COVID movement that to get back, to use L&D investments to get people back together. And obviously, I applaud those movements because people need community in their organizations. And I would suggest that they should not come at the expense of building sort of ongoing learning efforts to develop the skills that are going to situate them for the next 5 years as we see a period of change that is going to bring enormous transformation to the enterprise. This is not a time to sit back passively and watch developments like artificial intelligence transform work. This is a time to embrace what are the skills and capabilities that we're going to need to maximize the opportunities for our workforce to upskill and be ready for these changes and not reacting to them in ways that exacerbate the disruption they will naturally cause. If you look, I was looking at the World Economic Forum report that just came out this month around the kind of global transformation CEOs are leading. And you can't pick up a newspaper right now without seeing that we are in a phase where we are both transforming the nature of how work gets done through technology, and to some degree unwinding some of the supply chain arrangements that we put in place over the last decade. While I don't think those things will radically unwind, it will mean that the frequency of significant change that organizations have to navigate is only going to go up. You add things like migration to that, and you have a fairly turbulent future that we leaders have to navigate. We have to bring people together. This is a yes and. This is not a comment about not bringing people together. In fact, I'm fully for that. But we have to also build out the muscles that allow leaders to develop the skills to manage their teams, to recruit new talent, to retain the talent they have, to upskill that talent, to be able to handle these transformations. And I think this is an enterprise level initiative. It's not enough to just focus it on your top leaders or your high potential leaders. Those who manage people all the way down to the front line, if you want a culture that is close to its customer, a culture that attracts the newest, most skilled talent, a culture that actually is going to give feedback up the organization to advise it early on that it needs to make changes in order to succeed in business, you are going to need to build a culture that trusts one another, that feels safe giving feedback to one another, that feels encouraged to be open and expressing ideas. And that is day-to-day work. And I believe we're at a moment in time where technology makes it possible to do that from literally the C-suite down to the front line. And I think simulations can be a huge part of that. They are not the entire solution, but they are a huge part of what can be transformative in the enterprise.
Yeah. And, you mentioned, CEOs and leaders are really not looking ahead 3 to 5 years anymore. It's more kind of assessing the need now and kind of within the next 3 months, 6 months is how leaders are kind of mapping out their strategic plans and how they can adapt them as necessarily and as quickly as possible. Some of the discussions we had last week, and this is so fresh on my mind, we had the CLO from United, we had a learning leader from Accenture, a learning leader from Verizon and HP, and they were all discussing, what is next for the CHL or CLO, and it's exactly what you said, and to add to that, it's just leaders need to be even more tech savvy and understand how they can leverage these technologies even more so than in the past. You can't just rely on your teams. You don't necessarily have to be able to code, but you really need to understand how it works and what the possibilities are. And it doesn't mean, there's so much out there that everything's going to work either. And in highly regulated environments such as the airlines or telecommunication, they are using and embracing these technologies and figuring out ways through security, through, with banking and financial institutions. They are all very much, I wouldn't say ahead of the game, but they are not sitting back to, in the past, some of these highly regulated industries sometimes waited a bit to kind of see how the technology evolves, right? And see, some of the mistakes that others had made before they jumped in. But now you kind of have to take I don't want to say the plunge, but you really can't sit back. You have to seek and understand and educate and try and test to help lead your teams to understand how to leverage and how to operate in this environment if you're going to still be a leader.
We work very closely with most of those areas. So United, super proud of the work that they are doing. And from the vantage point we've had around it, I think you could be more correct about the thoughtfulness they're giving into the capability building they need to do for the future of the enterprise. And Accenture and Avanade, their joint venture with Microsoft that we've been working with for a while now. I thought the unique leadership strands that they have developed, I think are a model for any enterprise. Super proud to be working alongside of them, and HP as well. They're doing some fantastic stuff around coaching. Super impressed with what we're seeing there. You're naming the kinds of organizations that are really taking the time to think about not just the technical tools that will serve them in the future, but also I think what their CEOs and their CFOs are asking of them is, how do we correlate this upskilling effort that you're leading us around to business outcomes that we care about and report back to our shareholders? And I think the data, this is an area we're all learning, by the way. I think this is true in higher ed. I think it's true in K-12, and it's still true in the enterprise. Correlating the data, getting all of us vendors to be able to uniformly describe the employees the same way, use the same data for each employee, to be able to connect the skill development work that's going on in other systems with the work going on in our systems, to merge our data around aligned competency frameworks so we can show growth, both technical knowledge development and the human skills or durable skills, as we like to say, the growth in those areas at the same time, so that we have a holistic view of capabilities. It's one thing to have a set of skills on a resume match the set of skills on a job description. It's another thing to know which leaders actually are living those skills every day on the job and bringing the rest of their organization along on the journey to develop those skills. That's what leaders want to know, because they came to care about those skills because those are what drive the business outcomes. And I think we're approaching a moment in time where technology is going to make it possible to get a holistic picture of not so much are we hiring just, it's important, but not just are we hiring the right person for the right job, but are they able to do that job day to day, often under stressful circumstances, in a way that protects our brand, drives our mission forward, makes us more efficient, makes us more successful with our customers. And that's the promise, I think, of the integrated efforts that some of the organizations you're describing are leading.
It's definitely an interesting time. And before we wrap up today, speaking of technology and Gen AI, what are your thoughts with how you're using Gen AI to help with your solutions?
Well, so Mursion in some ways was a business that existed in the hope that someday people would invent Gen AI, because we pioneered this idea of doing AI supported simulations and have always used humans who are highly trained in the skills associated with developing empathy and understand the context in which challenging conversations emerge, usually people that have a strong improv background, to provide the spoken dialogue. Those live simulations are the hallmark of the work we do. It ensures psychological safety and an opportunity to learn and a rich coaching experience. And so we're super proud of that. But as I've often told people, we've managed to leverage a human in our tech stack, and now generative AI has made it possible for us to deliver similar experiences without the human in the tech stack on an on-demand basis. And there are unique affordances to both. Mursion will always be a provider of live simulations and on-demand simulations. And one of the affordances of the on-demand simulations is for the somewhat 60% of the frontline workforce that gets none of the kind of training around the skills we've been talking about in this fun conversation. Those people who really anchor the behaviors that customers experience when they experience a brand, those people who interact with them are now, through generative AI, going to be able to get the same kind of skills that the C-suite and the senior management have been getting through more human-delivered services. And we're very excited. I think that means enterprise-wide transformation is going to be that much easier and affordable to enact. That to us is presenting the beginning of a very new frontier for org-wide transformation. And I think all of those companies you referenced earlier very much are on that path.
Well, thank you, Mark. Fascinating conversation or discussion with you. I'm fascinated by all the work that you're doing, and you definitely have some unique solutions to the market. And I've seen kind of how you've evolved over the years. So it's impressive, the client work that you're engaged in. And I look forward to staying connected and continuing sharing your solutions to our clients, and we share a community together. So it's great to be able to help uplift our clients and help them kind of move and in a positive direction and help them show positive impact.
Well, and Rachel, thank you for your great questions, and thank you for the thought leadership that Brandon Hull has always brought the field, both in its publications and its convenience. Your convenings are some of the richest sessions that we as an organization have ever experienced. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And coming from you, I feel that's a huge compliment based on your background and your journalism. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Take care until we chat again. Thank you.
To that. Thank you.